In the spring of 1920, right as Paris is trying its hardest to outdress its grief from the war, a 4-year-old boy named René was poisoned.
Yeah, and at his own mother's funeral, no less.
Right. He was just sitting there, right next to his grieving grandmother eating these pureed potatoes, when a massive dose of military-grade strychnine basically just shut down his nervous system.
It's a brutal way to die.
It really is. But see, when the medical examiner opened the boy up on the autopsy table, what actually horrified him wasn't the poison in the stomach.
No, it was the fact that the child's heart, like biologically speaking, shouldn't have even been able to beat at all.
Exactly. It was structurally impossible.
Yeah, the coroner, Dr. Kellerman, he documented this profound structural impossibility. Renee's heart had an extra atrial chamber, but it completely lacked pulmonary veins connecting to the lungs.
Wait, so oxygen wasn't even circulating?
Right, not through standard respiration anyway. And beyond that, the blood chemistry itself was entirely foreign. It lacked iron hemoglobin.
Which makes blood red, right?
Yeah. Yes. Instead, it showed this incredibly high concentration of copper-based hemocyanin.
Oh, wow.
Which is something you'd expect to find in, like, a deep-sea horseshoe crab, you know? Not a mammalian child in Paris.
That is just, I mean, that's insane.
Kellerman realized the boy was a physiological impossibility. The strychnine merely interrupted a biological engine that defied earthly science.
And that staggering reality is exactly what's at the center of today's deep dive. We're looking into this Centre Selene affair.
A truly wild sequence of events.
Yeah, one that was systematically suppressed by authorities in post-World War I France. What starts with this accidental drowning and then a brazen public assassination unravels into this massive hidden network.
Anomalous medical records, secret high society fertility clinics.
Right, and an ancient parasitic consciousness slumbering beneath the French countryside.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. So our mission today is to examine the mechanics of this case for you. We need to understand how the unutterable trauma of a post-war generation basically provided a massive contractual loophole for something terrifying to pull itself into the waking world.
Exactly. We aren't just looking at a 1920s whodunit. We have to look at the why.
So let's jump in. The timeline begins at the Montmartre Cemetery, right?
Yeah, on an indecently sunny day, the family is burying Emily Frunker, who is Renee's mother. She had recently drowned in what the police ruled a tragic accident at a rural mill.
And the atmosphere at this funeral is so important.
Oh, absolutely. The sensory details here establish the baseline psychological tension. You have this extended bourgeois family just suffocating under the weight of recent history.
Yeah, the grandmother, Aunt Germaine, she's nearly 70.
Right, and she's been hollowed out by attritional loss. The trenches took her sons, the influenza epidemic took her siblings, and now the river has taken her last surviving daughter.
Just unimaginably tragic. And standing next to her at the grave is the first visible fracture in reality, which is René.
The 4-year-old.
Right. He's dressed in miniature mourning clothes, and he's exhibiting this cognitive dissonance that immediately alarms his older cousin, Etienne Moreau.
Yeah, Etienne notices that the boy is just too still.
Like unnaturally still.
Exactly. He isn't fidgeting, he isn't crying, he isn't displaying any of the confusion you'd expect from a developing brain trying to process the permanence of death.
Etienne actually watches him engaging with adult mourners. And when people offer condolences, the boy responds with these perfectly articulated, emotionally flat phrases.
Like, "Thank you, madame. Grand-mère says Mama is with God."
I am being brave.
Right. He's reciting a script. It's this auditory mimicry of grief. Etienne senses this fundamental wrongness, this intuition that the child is performing the concept of a human boy rather than actually being one.
Which sets the stage for the traditional morning meal back at Germaine's house. René was actually sent ahead, spared the graveside burial.
Which is pretty standard for a young child.
Yeah. But when the family returns, the dining room is just packed. Servants are rushing around with platters of cold meats and heavy creams. And Etienne sits next to his cousin Mathieu.
Who is a seasoned pharmacist, which is a very crucial detail.
Right. They're both quietly observing René, who is just methodically eating his pureed potatoes.
Mathieu notes the boy's eerie composure too, but initially he just diagnoses it as acute shock.
Which makes sense.
Sure. But moments later, René takes a bite of the puree, swallows, makes this tiny, sharp intake of breath, and just drops his fork.
Oh my God.
Yeah, then he collapses entirely. His face rapidly cyanoses, turning that deep, oxygen-starved blue.
And obviously the room just shatters into chaos,
Mm.
glass breaking, people screaming.
Absolute panic.
But Cousin Mathieu pushes through it, checks the boy's rigid, seizing muscles, and makes this terrifyingly fast diagnosis.
Mm.
He looks at Etienne and says it's a massive dose of strychnine.
Because Mathieu recognizes the distinct neurological hijacking.
How exactly does strychnine work? I mean, structurally.
Well, it acts as a powerful antagonist at the glycine and acetylcholine receptors in the spinal cord.
Okay, so it blocks signals.
Exactly. Without those inhibitory signals, the motor neurons just fire continuously. The victim experiences devastating full-body muscle spasms.
And that leads to asphyxiation, right?
Yes, because the diaphragm locks in place. The onset is brutal and incredibly rapid. Mathieu tells Etienne that he sells enough of the world's darker chemicals to know an intentional eradication when he sees one.
And let's just pause and consider the mechanics of a crime like this. Slipping poison into a child's food at a crowded family dinner.
It's incredibly brazen.
Exactly. It's like an Agatha Christie locked room setup, but so much darker. It defies all logic of self-preservation. You don't do this if your goal is just to get away with a quiet murder for an inheritance.
No, you do this if you believe the target is an immediate catastrophic threat that absolutely must be neutralized publicly.
Right. So Inspector Janvier arrives from the Parisian prefecture, and he just runs this completely conventional and therefore useless investigation.
He's looking for standard motives. Disgruntled heirs, scorned lovers.
Yeah, he questions the kitchen staff.
Yeah.
And one maid does recall a strange woman entering through the service door during the meal prep,
The press later names her the woman in black.
which is so dramatic. But the maid describes her as tall, gaunt, and remarkably composed. She just blended into the periphery of this morning household, slipped into the kitchen, adulterated the specific dish prepared for the child, and vanished.
But the real mystery isn't who is in the kitchen. It's why someone would target a 4-year-old with such extreme prejudice. Janvier is hopelessly out of his depth trying to solve this like a domestic dispute.
And Etienne realizes that. He knows the police aren't going to figure this out, and by that evening, his Aunt Germaine is already planning a funeral for her grandson before the dirt on her daughter's grave has even settled.
It's a nightmare.
So Etienne brings in his own trusted circle. He recruits Claire Duval, who was a former frontline triage nurse.
She operated in the absolute worst theaters of the war, so she's unflappable.
Right, and Lucien Arnaud, this cynical investigative journalist who is deeply embedded in the Parisian subterranean economy.
Claire brings this indispensable analytical framework to the table. During the war, she learned to strip away sentimentality and look purely at cause and effect.
Yeah, when Etienne outlines the dual tragedies, Emily's drowning, followed by René's poisoning, Claire immediately dismisses the idea of coincidence.
She isolates the motive. A 4-year-old possesses no political or financial capital. So she concludes they're looking at fear, revenge, or a highly specific fanaticism.
Which brings us to the morgue. Lucien uses his municipal contacts to bypass the official police embargo, and he gets the team into the basement to speak directly with Dr. Kellerman.
And this is where Kellerman provides the unredacted medical file. This is where we get the details of that structural impossibility we discussed earlier.
The missing pulmonary system and the copper-dense blood.
Right. Kellerman states that René's physiology was essentially a ticking time bomb. The child would have suffered sudden cardiac death within a decade regardless.
So the strychnine was just a preemptive strike.
Exactly. Against an organism that was already biologically incompatible with human life.
And Lucien hears this impossible medical data and makes a really chilling deduction. He says, a malformed heart doesn't typically provoke an assassination.
No, it doesn't.
But it strongly suggests that whoever poisoned René knew about this biological corruption. They looked at the boy and didn't see a grieving child. They saw an apex anomaly that had to be exterminated.
So to trace the origin of this anomaly, they have to pivot to the mother. They need to understand what Emily Frankier was doing before she died.
Right, which takes the team to Vernon, this rural commune where Emily owned an old ivy-strangled mill bordered by a slow, deep river.
They interview the property caretakers, the Barlews, and the pediatric nurse, Madame Isthar.
And the caretakers offer this tense, deeply uncomfortable portrait of the household. Mr. Barley casually mentions that René spent hours sitting in perfect silence, reading advanced texts.
A 4-year-old demonstrating hyperlexia and sustained motionless focus.
Yeah. And Mrs. Barlew finally breaks the polite facade and admits that Emily was terrified of her own child.
Madame Manson, the nurse, corroborates this entirely. She states, Renee was unfailingly polite, completely devoid of malice, yet entirely devoid of warmth.
He absorbed complex information at an unnatural rate.
Yes, and when Etienne asks if Emily loved her son, the nurse describes a dynamic rooted in cold dread. She noted that Emily's primary emotion when looking at Renee wasn't maternal affection, and it wasn't the grief of a widow either.
It was recognition.
Exactly, recognition. She saw something staring back at her that she intrinsically understood, and it paralyzed her.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let's play devil's advocate for a second. It's 1920. We are talking about a woman whose husband was just slaughtered in the trenches. She's raising a child alone during a period of massive national trauma.
True.
Isn't it highly probable that we are just looking at severe postpartum depression, compounded by PTSD, being pathologized by superstitious rural caretakers?
It's a very fair question.
I mean, she's a detached, grieving mother, struggling to bond with a neurodivergent, hyperlexic child.
Yeah.
The distance creates this eerie household dynamic, and the locals just fill in the gaps with ghost stories.
And that psychological interpretation is the exact friction point Etienne wrestles with. In a vacuum, a depressed widow and a quiet, perhaps autistic child is a tragic, common post-war reality.
Right.
However, that sociological explanation shatters against the anvil of Dr. Kellerman's autopsy report. Postpartum depression does not rewrite a child's cardiovascular system to run on hemocyanin.
Yeah, trauma does not delete pulmonary veins.
Exactly. The psychological tension at the mill was merely the outward symptom of a profound physical alienness. The physiological anomalies directly mirror the behavioral ones.
The physical evidence demands a monstrous origin. And furthermore, we have to look at the circumstances of Emily's death itself.
The drowning.
Yeah. The official report states she slipped on a damp bank at dusk and drowned. But Renee was present on the riverbank when it happened. Etienne is forced to consider the horrifying physics of a small child pushing a paralyzed, terrified woman into a slow current.
To figure out why Renee was so fundamentally wrong and where he came from, the trio returns to Paris to search Emily's abandoned apartment.
And this is where Lucien finds the paper trail. Beneath layers of mundane household receipts, he extracts a single, highly unusual invoice.
Dated September 1914.
Right, addressed to a facility called the Centre Selene in the Touraine region. And the amount paid is astronomical.
Claire immediately recognizes the financial footprint of a discreet, high society fertility clinic.
But it's Lucien who crunches the temporal math, which is startling. The invoice is from September 1914. Renee was born in July 1915.
That 10-month gap is the smoking gun. It means whatever happened at Selene preceded his conception. The clinic wasn't treating an ongoing pregnancy. It was the mechanism of the conception itself.
And just as they make this connection, Lucien brings in the morning dispatches. The woman in black has resurfaced.
She attempted to breach the service entrance of the Hôtel de Varsenac, which is the heavily guarded estate of a deeply influential former government minister.
Yeah, she was asking maids highly specific questions about the children of the household before being chased off by private security.
So the team cross-references the Varsenac family timeline. They find out the Marquis and Marquise have a 3-year-old daughter and a son named Antoine, who was born in December 1915.
Another child born in the window, immediately following the height of the Centre Selene's operations.
Right. Etienne uses his family's societal standing to get an uninvited audience with the Marquise de Varsenac.
And they're granted access to her private sitting room. She is the epitome of aristocratic composure, right up till Claire silently slides the Centre Selene invoice across the mahogany table.
Her neurological response is immediate. Her hands tremor. She tries to dismiss them, claiming the clinic was merely a holistic retreat for fresh air and calisthenics.
Run by a woman named Madame Isthar.
Yes, but mid-denial, the door to the adjacent nursery drifts open.
And Etienne looks through the gap and sees Antoine de Varsenac.
Mm-hmm.
And the boy possesses the exact same terrifying crystalline stillness as Renee.
He's sitting among wooden blocks, not playing, just existing with the motionless intensity of a painted saint.
And across the room, his younger sister is behaving like a normal toddler, making noise, banging toys. The juxtaposition is just violent.
The Marquise follows Etienne's gaze, sees her son, and her aristocratic facade entirely collapses. She confesses to visiting the Touraine clinic.
She admits she didn't believe the occult theatricality Madame Isthar peddled, but she was out of options. And then she utters a phrase that really unlocks the sociological core of this entire nightmare. She says, "I wanted a child."
And we really have to pause here and provide some historical context. To understand how this clinic operated, we have to examine the sociological landscape of 1914 and 1915 Paris.
Why were the wealthiest women traveling to rural terrain for fertility treatments?
Well, the demographic collapse of France during the Great War created an unprecedented psychological crucible for women. The state had lost nearly 1.4 million men.
Paris was a city of absent husbands.
Exactly. The societal mandate for upper-class women to produce heirs, to continue bloodlines, and secure inheritances became a suffocating, almost militarized pressure.
A woman's failure to conceive wasn't treated as a medical misfortune. It was seen as a moral and societal failure.
Right. They faced the quiet disgust of mothers-in-law, the clinical dismissal of male physicians, and the terrifying prospect of familial irrelevance.
And into this massive, silent vacuum of desperation steps the Centre Selene. Madame Isthar didn't even need to run newspaper advertisements.
No, the promise of a discreet, guaranteed miracle spreads through the whispers of desperate women in Parisian tea rooms.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because the chilling pattern is now fully illuminated. Women travel to Selene, carrying the immense weight of societal shame. They return, they conceive.
But the resulting offspring, these miracle children, are fundamentally different from normal children.
They harbor anomalous biology, evoke primal terror in their mothers, and share a hive mind stillness.
So with this pattern established, the investigators realize they have no choice but to take a train south to see this miracle clinic for themselves.
They travel 30 kilometers outside of Tours to a large repurposed farm built directly into the side of a massive, ancient hill.
Lucien, of course, is anticipating gargoyles and a sinister Gothic stronghold, and he is profoundly disappointed.
Yeah, the estate is immaculate. It's a high-end, bright wellness retreat. Tennis courts, a glass-covered natatorium, climbing roses.
It's architecturally designed to soothe the anxieties of wealthy Parisian women.
Claire actually observes the layout and notes that evil rarely bothers to hire a sinister architect. The mundane luxury is the camouflage.
And they are greeted by the proprietor, Madame Isthar, whose real name is Sidonie Draville.
She's a relic of the Belle Epoque occult scene, right?
Yes, a former minor celebrity known for theatrical seances and minor scandals, now wrapped in expensive silks and heavy jewelry.
And she's fascinating because her business model wasn't inherently evil on the surface. When the team subtly interrogates her, she's remarkably transparent.
She explains that society punishes women for the mysteries of their own biology. Her cure consists of removing them from that toxic environment.
She provides nutrient-rich meals, physical exercise, pristine air, and what she cheerfully calls a little theater.
She was intentionally selling a placebo effect. She leads them in breathing exercises and burns incense, providing a psychological release valve for women who have been blamed for their barrenness.
She admits her success rate is higher than it biologically should be, but she attributes it to the reduction of stress. She literally thinks she is running a lucrative health spa.
But her location choice was catastrophic.
Yeah. How does a scam artist accidentally tap into an ancient nightmare? How does her mundane greed contrast with the actual darkness of the geography?
Well, her mundane fraud accidentally intersected with a genuine subterranean anomaly. She set up her theater of fake miracles directly on top of something that actually answers prayers.
To figure this out, Claire checks in as a patient. She uncovers the clinic's theater and waits for secret blood rituals, but experiences only brisk walks and boredom.
The true horror reveals itself in the subconscious. On her second night, Claire intercepts a conversation with a fellow patient named Helene.
And Helene is highly distressed by a recurring, hyperlucid dream. In the dream, she feels a presence radiating from the massive hill behind the clinic.
The hill speaks to her, not in a booming voice, but with a quiet, omnipresent pressure. It asks her a single question. What do you want?
And Claire asks Helene how she responded. And Helene, weeping, admits she gave the answer every woman there harbors. She said she wanted a child.
She gave verbal consent in a state of compromised consciousness. Claire realizes the mechanism of the clinic isn't the incense or the exercises. The mechanism is the hill itself, harvesting the desires of the women while they sleep.
While Madame Isthar is running a mundane scam inside, Etienne and Lucien are out investigating the geographic history at the local village inn.
The Hostellerie du Cheval Blanc. The villagers harbor a deep, superstitious resentment toward the clinic.
Lucien manages to track down the previous owner of the farm. The man had abandoned the property years ago. He details a history of agricultural and biological failure on that land. Crops rotted, livestock mutated.
But the psychological toll was worse. He describes waking up in the dead of night and hearing his name being called from the dirt beneath the foundation. He specifies that the voice came from under everything.
So the land itself is a contaminated reservoir. And this is exactly when the localized threat escalates. The innkeeper alerts Etienne that a gaunt woman dressed in black has just arrived.
Jean Le Guinea.
She's demanding a room and asking about the children at the Centre Selene. The assassin is returned to the source.
And the confrontation between Etienne's team and Jean in the hallway of the village inn is just a masterclass in moral and psychological ambiguity.
Jeanne is physically deteriorating, burning with feverish fanaticism. She's carrying a heavily worn Bible and a weighted handbag that Claire deduces contains the strychnine and a knife.
Jean assumes the trio are operatives hired by Madame Isthar. She starts raving about the painted witch on the hill and the children who are not children.
Etienne plainly states that they know she murdered Renee.
And her reaction is completely devoid of guilt. Her face illuminates with the terrifying pride of a zealot. She openly admits to the poisoning, stating simply, "I stopped him."
She reveals she was a former nurse at Selene. She realized the truth, that the children were unnatural, their souls eaten. And she possesses a list of 24 children.
We really need to unpack Jean's psychology here. She's a religious fanatic driven mad by exposure to a genuine anomaly. She saw herself as a martyr stopping monsters.
And it introduces a staggering philosophical paradox. I mean, Jean murdered a 4-year-old. But if the child was a vessel for an ancient entity, does her madness contain a horrifying rationality?
That's the terrifying moral ambiguity. Society universally condemns the murder of a child. But she viewed herself as an antibody fighting a cosmic infection.
Claire attempts a diplomatic de-escalation, offering to take the list and protect the children. But Jean coldly replies that their souls are already consumed. They are empty vessels.
And Claire counters with a profound ethical boundary line. She tells Jean, no child is born guilty because adults were desperate.
And the moment she articulates that defense, the environment violently reacts. The oil lamps in the corridor gutter and suffocate. The temperature plummets.
Jean's manic pride evaporates into primal terror. She whispers that it is listening. The entity beneath the hill possesses a geographic awareness, and they just tripped its alarm system.
Realizing this, the team knows they have to force Madame Isthar to see the truth of what her clinic has awakened. They physically detain Jean and march her, along with the autopsy reports and the ledger, straight back to Selene.
They bypass Isabella's security and breach Isthar's private office.
And Isthar defaults to her theatricality, threatening to call the police. But the team systematically dismantles her reality. Lucien drops the newspaper clippings of the assassinations.
Claire presents the invoice linked to the impossible conception timeline.
Etienne reads the clinical details of Renee's hemocyan in blood.
The empirical evidence just crushes her defense. She weakly offers the universal defense of the grifter. I never meant harm.
And Claire mercilessly responds, that is not the same as doing none. Ignorance of the blast radius does not absolve you of lighting the fuse.
To empirically prove the entity's presence and determine its operational rules, they propose a dangerous experiment. A direct interface using Jean as a conduit, since her mind is already attuned to the hill.
They initiate a midnight ritual in Isthar's office. Isthar draws chalk circles, arranges salt barriers, lights candles, and induces a hypnotic trance in Jean.
The sensory shift in the room is instantaneous and violently physical. As Jean slips into the trance, the atmospheric pressure drops.
There's this suffocating scent of ancient anaerobic earth.
The physiological manifestation of a geologic consciousness waking up. The massive oak desk cracks in half. The candle flames bend at a severe 90-degree angle, all pointing toward Jean.
And the entity speaks through Jean. Not with a booming cinematic voice, but with a patient, unbooming voice. Etienne asks the entity to identify its purpose, and it simply replies, hungry.
Etienne demands to know what it wants. The entity answers, what is promised.
Claire demands to know who authorized this promise. And the entity reveals its bargain. It says it was invited by empty arms, by weeping beds, by women who beg in sleep and forget in sunlight.
It feeds on the desperation of empty arms.
Okay, let's unpack this. The entity utilized a fungal mechanism of entry, right? Think of the humongous fungus in Oregon. The mushrooms above ground are just fruiting bodies. The actual organism is a massive subterranean mycelial network.
That's a perfect analogy. The entity didn't force anyone. It listened to the subconscious begging of women in their sleep and fulfilled the contract. It weaponized society's pressure on these women.
It used their silent shame as a loophole to enter the waking world. But Claire asks what price it extracts for these miracles.
Shin's eyes snap open, completely flooded with black blood, and the entity answers, the first soul.
It consumes the human consciousness and replaces it with its own awareness.
The utterance of that truth shatters the containment. The glass windows detonate inward. Jin starts violently convulsing.
And in this chaos, Etienne hallucinates, or rather, he is forcefully dragged into a psychic projection. He sees an underground chamber of old stones and trapped lights.
He's looking into the cavernous void beneath the soil. Suspended in the center is a massive biological mass, pulsing with a geologic heartbeat.
And the tiny lights orbiting it are the fragments of souls, the 24 consumed children. The entity is a decentralized intelligence, and the children are its biological sensory organs.
The projection severs, slamming Etienne back. The office is ablaze, and they realize the immense scale of the danger. The entity is fully awake, and its immune response is to eradicate them.
They face a terrifying siege. They initiate a rapid evacuation of the 1920s clinic. Isabella pivots into military evacuation mode, loading the wealthy patients into motor cars under the guise of a boiler failure.
But Sebastian, the elderly gardener, is possessed by the entity. He leads a group of slack-faced staff to attack the clinic.
At 2 a.m., Sebastian's voice, stripped of inflection, politely requests entry through the barricaded doors.
Madame Isthar retrieves a heavy, leather-bound book, claiming it's an authentic medieval grimoire with a banishing ritual.
But Lucien looks at it and spots the fraud immediately. It's a grotesque amalgamation of Church Latin and absolute gibberish.
Yet Lucien concedes that gibberish is their best option against a possessed gardener.
So they retreat to the meditation room. They establish a defensive perimeter with chalk, binding John in the center. The possessed staff are marching down the hallway.
Madame Isthar begins reciting the garbled Latin, but the entity bypasses the physical barricade and attacks them on a psychological vector.
It projects pure, unfiltered trauma directly into their minds. Etienne and Claire are forced to experience the suffocating despair of the women who came to the clinic.
The entity weaponizes this grief. It telepathically argues that it provided a service, fulfilled the contract, and demands to know by what moral authority they dare to void a bargain made in crushing pain.
It's a devastating logical trap. Claire's resolve fractures for a moment, but then her combat triage training kicks in. She remembers Renee's blue face, Dr. Kellerman's autopsy.
She realizes the true weapon isn't the magic or the fake Latin, it's the assertion of absolute bodily and psychological autonomy.
Claire locks eyes with the barricaded door and loudly refuses the bargain. She screams, "Pain does not make consent eternal."
That is the core theme of this entire deep dive, naming the trauma and refusing to be bound by bargains made in moments of extreme vulnerability.
By dragging the contract into the light and verbally voiding it, they sever its supply line. Lucien and Isthar join the chorus. "You are not owed."
The force that erupts from the chalk circle is a concussive blast of pure denial. It pushes the entity back into deep slumber. The possessed staff collapse, reverting to confused civilians.
The siege is broken, and the immediate aftermath requires a massive cover-up. Inspector Janvier arrives. Jane is arrested as a crazed lone killer, taking the fall happily.
The official record is sanitized. The police file closes on a solitary, religiously motivated poisoning. Selene closes for repairs. History sanitizes the bizarre to make it palatable.
But Etienne keeps a list of 24 names. He lies to his Aunt Germaine, sparing her the horrifying truth of the hemocyanin heart.
This whole affair ties back to a brutal reflection on societal pressure. How often do we make bad bargains in our lowest moments?
Yeah, how often does society's pressure force us to accept cures that are worse than the disease?
Whether it's a toxic relationship, a dependency, or an ideology that demands we sign away our autonomy. And do we have the fortitude to declare that our pain does not make our consent eternal?
That's the real takeaway here. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, a lingering mathematical reality.
The 24 names.
Exactly. The entity wasn't killed, it was just put back to sleep, scattered into 24 living pieces across the world in 1920. Over a century has passed.
Those 24 children grew up, had families, and passed down their bloodlines.
They integrated into the population. So next time you are at a crowded dinner party, or navigating a busy transit station, or sitting quietly at a very normal funeral, pay close attention to the people around you.
If you encounter someone with an unnatural stillness,
A strange calmness, or an eerily quiet heartbeat, ask yourself what old bargains might be sleeping in their blood.